Hey, folks, welcome back to The Pulse. It is Stephen Friday once again, episode 33 on December 22nd, 11 o'clock Central Texas time. My name is Matt. This is Crypto Harvey, and we do this. Well, we've done this 33 times. This is our 33rd time to do Right Side Up with Steve Staggs. And we've talked about so many things. I just have to remind you, why did we even start this in the first place? So we thought, you know what? These conversations that we're having in private, what if we had those in public? Because it's not like they're scripted. And would it be beneficial to people who are interested in having these type of conversations and examining this thing, right? One of the things that Steve talks about a lot is probing the truth. What does it mean to probe the truth? Well, the beauty of the truth is you can probe it and probe it and probe it. It's true. It's very cool. But it is also Christmas time. It is the 22nd of December. And we have to at least pull in the theme. And I was thinking about this, not everybody knows. They're like, well, we sing Christmas carols and do all that kind of stuff, but how significant this story is of the birth of Jesus. And I mean, that's been he's been the main character in 33 episodes. So kind of cool that we're having a birthday celebration of this, but we'll probably talk about that. But let's bring in the man of the 2 hour, and that's Steve Staggs. What's up, Steve?
Well, I guess that means we're a little windy.
That's right. It's okay. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, thank you. Getting ready for the weekend, and my wife is over with my daughter at her house with the girls, and they're going to come over for a sleepover while the younger folks go out and play.
Good. That's wonderful, and it's amazing. It's times like this in the year, sometimes you slow down, right? You do different things that you normally don't do. I think, spending more concentrated time with family, you probably eat too much. But I was watching a film, and I was very, retrospective. There's a new movie called Maestro that's come out about Leonard Bernstein.
Yeah.
And it's Bradley Cooper movie. And of course, it's like almost it's amazing. They basically said when they had shown this film, there was a 7-minute standing ovation at the end of it.
Wow.
And I was so interested in this. I watched about 3/4 of it last night, and then I watched about 2 hours of actual Leonard Bernstein like interviews. And I'm like, this is stunning. It's the same person, so it's definitely, from an art perspective, it's a work of art. But it got me thinking about that era, right? Kind of post-war era, in the story of what things were like in the world post-war, and of course, Jews in the world and what had happened. And there was a bit of a renaissance between, it's almost like from the end of the war, let's say 47 to when y'all screwed everything up, right? So that was what, the 60s? That was a jab. I tried to make that one as good as I can there. All you folks in your mescaline, you made a mescaline of it. But what's amazing is, though, you know what I mean? Like, there was this interesting time between 47 and probably 62, 63, like let's say when Kennedy was shot, like that kind of like window of a really interesting time. And of course, this is that story. And it made me think about these cycles. And we're in a time of real crisis and real change, and it's not even near coming to a head. Now we have all kinds of other things to consider that they didn't have to consider at the time. But it's interesting that art and beauty and kind of an exhaling of a people, right? Post-war, an exhaling, and what like flourished from that was art, right? Expression and all this stuff. And it's very common. I mean, you think about the Renaissance and all of those things, is that when people are not fighting and not fearful, they create. And I thought it was an interesting concept as it relates to what we talk about, which is being made in the image of God and having a creative ability and that expression, right? Like if there's a tornado coming through your town, you're in the basement, right? And you're concerned. But when it's Christmas time and everything's right, and everything is perfect, and you've got a glass of bourbon and you're sitting by the fire talking to people you love, you don't have fear, right? There's a beauty in that, and it creates something special. Um, anyway, I was reflecting on that stuff, and I was thinking about, um, do you think we have like a I almost feel like you create those moments, when we talk about the kingdom of God, do people create those moments regardless of the conditions? It seems like we have the capacity to do that. And here you are saying, yeah, they're gonna have a sleepover. And like, is that kind of, what you do? Do you attempt to kind of create those experiences for grandkids and those that are around? Because I feel like when I'm around you, it's almost like we kind of sit into a bubble, if you will, of not safety, but almost a place where you're like, hey, maybe the kingdom can be like right here for a little bit of time. Maybe this 2 hours.
Well, yeah, another great question, Matt. We just do not have any kind of a comprehension of the power that is invested in God's Elohim man.
Mm.
And I don't mean that from I'm going to go out and do my own thing regardless of who it affects or how it affects them. That's not what I'm talking about. That there is something vested in God's man, and I'm using man generically,
Yeah.
as a race of beings, male and female. There is something vested in God's man that is profound in its nature. And that is, man, if you want peace, you can produce peace.
Mm.
You have that capacity to produce peace. Now, you don't have the authority to impose that peace on someone else, but you have the ability to sovereignly decree that peace in your life.
Wow.
Under any circumstance, under any situation. I mean, look at it with Jesus on the cross. There's an example. Or Stephen when he was being stoned. Or Paul when he was, these examples that we see in the scriptures, the traditions of Peter, in being crucified. No, turn me upside down. I'm not worthy to be crucified, in the way my Lord was crucified. Those kinds of things where there is a declaration of peace that the outside world can't impose its violence on you in the core of your being. Now, man, that's sovereignty.
Wow.
I mean, that is having some pretty serious horsepower.
Yeah.
Well, I was fortunate enough to learn that many years ago. It even starts with something as simple as, we have sayings like, wake up and smell the coffee, stop and smell the roses.
Yeah.
Those kinds of things where you say, hey, there's an intentionality in pausing to enjoy.
Mm. Mm.
Well, I've learned that secret.
What a wonderful theme for today. I think we didn't really have this planned, and I love how these things kind of pop out. But you know what is interesting? What's interesting about it is, well, I'm gonna put pause and I'm gonna say hello to the chat.
Please do.
And I've got a special photo to share with you. This is a little game show edition that we're gonna do here on Right Side Up with Steve Staggs. But this guy's here, Mike Ostel, always
Hello,
hungry
Mike.
for more. Merry Christmas to my dear friends. So here we go. Here's the quiz question, and this is for you, and you have to name who are these two handsome dudes.
Well, you've already been found out because Mike sent the picture to me the other day.
I had a feeling. So this is the mystery man Mike with his OU shirt on, looking healthy, and Sam Kemp, his best buddy, looks like in Florida. So I got permission from Sam and Mike to share that, but isn't
that fun?
It's so good. So Mike, thanks for being here. Always hungry for more. Merry Christmas to you, my friend. And think about this. We're just talking about this idea of we can create peace and that kind of cool sovereignty thing, right? And I want to talk about that here after we get out of the chat. But great to have you here, Mike, once again.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Dear friend.
yep. Identity Block, what's up? Blockchain Trends is here. Hexonium Christmas edition. It time to get the coin up. Absolutely, Hexonium. And then David Lee, all the way from southwestern Indiana. And then this guy, Godfather J6. So he's been in the background for the last 3 years or more, right? So Godfather J6, like I watch a ton of content about Hex and Pulse Chain and all this stuff, and I have for years. Every single time anyone is streaming, Godfather J6 is always there with a good word, and he's always been there.
Wow.
I mean, like anytime, anywhere I go, he's always there. He literally decided that he was going to start streaming, and this was what, 2 days ago? Yeah, Wednesday. And he showed his face for the first time, and he like a star was born. It was crazy. I'm like, how cool. And so guess what he's doing? He's doing content around Texan token. Isn't that cool?
Wow.
So
Yeah.
he is one of the most faithful of our community. He's always so supportive of everyone. And here he is once again, Godfather J6. Great to see you, always with a good word. It's so cool to see your face and your beard. He's got this giant beard. Fantastic. Hornet UK1 back again. Behold,
there
I come quick. Hold that fast which thou hast, that no man take thy crown. Fantastic. ID, what's going on? Stephen Crypto Heartbeat, good to have you here. Identity Block. Seems like nearly every film is about the devil and Jezebel. No, isn't that the truth? Bonnie and Clyde type story, Joker and Harlequin. That's right. Hexforce One made it to the live stream finally. Hexforce One, thanks for being here. And there he is, Sam Kemp. That's that guy right there. Sam, thanks for coming in, man, and thanks for sharing that photo of you and your buddy.
Yeah.
So let's see if I missed anybody here. Oh, Hex Glenn, what's going on? Casey Hex, what's going on? Merry Christmas, Matt, Steve, and family driving back home to Oklahoma for the holidays. Hey, this would be a great way. I love it when there's something that I know is going to be on for an hour or so and I'm in the car. Yeah. I love that. It's like makes things go by so quickly.
Whereabouts in Oklahoma?
Yeah, whereabouts, Casey Hex? And don't type while you're driving.
Yeah, don't. When you stop, type it in.
Yeah. Let us know then. Okay, so let's dig into this one. So this idea, when you talk about creating peace, right, in any and every situation, I mean, there's a lot of evidence that I often think about Neo in the Matrix once he realizes he's the one, right, and he flexes and the walls go boom and they bend, and then the three guys show up and they start shooting the guns, and he says no, and they stop in midair, and he literally picks the bullet out of the air. It's so interesting how those pictures of things to say, I feel like we've talked about the ports being open. That's kind of a technical analogy to, hey, there's so many things that are speaking into our minds and souls. Like there's constant noise, there's distractions. I mean, there's some core disciplines of that, but then there's the spiritual side of things, which we've kind of used as, hey, there's only one open port because I give authority to Jesus to speak to me only. That's been so valuable to me, this idea of Jesus, only you have the authority to speak to me. And it seems like if I can understand that, I'm letting them have access. Can you speak to that? Am I letting them have access? Am I being disciplined to close off those ports? Am I intentionally saying, no, I have the authority to create this peaceful experience? I have, like, help me understand the dynamic of how do I create that besides just saying I want it?
Yeah. There is this interesting thing that goes on with us. We see that we are the objects of exploitation. We see ourselves as creatures to be seized and controlled. We see all of this negative stuff, but we never pause to say, why is that going on?
Yeah.
Why is that actually happening? You say it all the time on your streams. We just didn't come out of the ooze. We're just not descendants of a monkey. See, there's a contradiction that exists on the planet that, on the one hand, views us as something to be seized, controlled, and ruled over. And on the other hand, being characterized as worth nothing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, that doesn't even make sense. If I'm not worth anything, if I'm a piece of crap, if I'm just, then why in the world do you want me? What? If I go walk down the street and I see a dog's business on the ground, am I going to go over there and say, hey man, I want to control you?
No.
No, we walk by and say, man, will somebody please take care of that crap over there? It's offensive. We want nothing to do with it. So if all we are is just an accumulation of cells and particles that really don't have anything of value in them other than to be exploited, then why are you attempting to do that? And are you not telling me by your very effort to rule, control, and exploit me that I have immeasurable value? And now it's up to me to try to figure out what that is. Why is it that you want to rule, control, and extract from me all that I have if I am worthless?
Okay, this is wow. I'm so glad that this is our topic. Okay, so let me say this back to you because there's a component of this that I think is really helpful. You kind of have to recognize that there are these attacks. So I think that there's a group of people who will be like, okay, all this phony stuff you're talking about, there's not somebody out to get you, we're just accidental. That's not the group we're talking to. We're talking to a group of people who go, you know what? It feels like there are forces that are trying to knock me off center. There are physical forces of people trying to lock me down. But then I also know that in my own quietness of my heart, I feel like I know these are lies I'm telling to myself or that they're coming in. I know that I'm being drawn off sides and pushed off center. And I'm, an emotional wreck at times. I'm like a roller coaster of emotions or whatever. And sometimes, you have no emotions. And it's like depression and all these kind of things that people are dealing with. And you make a really good point that, the dog crap or, any of the animals that I see that are wandering around foraging, there's not like this. It doesn't seem like there's this real desire to knock them off their daily schedule at all. But with us, there's constant picking at. In what you're saying is, why is that? Why are there forces outside of there, some that are here and some that are outside of here? Why are they trying to? And I think that's really the kind of the theme of the last 32 of these. And you said at the very beginning, because you've forgotten who you are.
Yeah. 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 That's right, Matt. And in one of our episodes, earlier episodes, you asked me if there was anything in particular that I was observing, that I was, concerned about. And my answer was, yeah, we've forgotten how to think. We don't know how to think anymore. We just get caught up in this momentum of insanity where we don't pause and get off the train and say, wait a minute, hold on, let me take a look at this thing for a minute and really evaluate this for what it is. Would I buy into, if I was trying to sell this to an investor, would he buy into this? Would he say, that's a really cool idea. Let me So what you're telling me, Staggs, is you could put a system in place where you could extract and scrape off all of the wealth that these creatures produce, and at the same time make them feel grateful that you're doing that?
Mm.
How do you plan on doing it? Well, by whittling them down to nothing, and that anything above nothing is now valuable to them. Anything above zero is now a benefit to them.
Hmm.
Well, Steve, how do you propose to do that? Sit down, take a seat, relax. We're going to be here for a while because I'm going to lay it out for you.
Well, and this makes me think about what you're saying is, are you interested?
Yeah.
And what's funny is I like the idea of having a hobby, but I don't really have any consistent ones, right? I guess this is my hobby right here, right? This is my only consistent hobby.
Yeah.
But I love creating things, right? And I always think about it, especially around kind of Christmas time, because I got a little bit of downtime. I'm like, I'd like to make some pottery, or I'd like to, I made knives for a while, and I like craft type of things, physical things. I like creating something, I like woodworking. I'm not really particularly good at it, but I really enjoy it. And it's interesting that's it's almost a picture of interest, right? You're like, you know what? I'm kind of interested in this. And what do you do when you're interested in something? You kind of probe it and examine it and all those type of things. And I just want to share this because this just popped up here. Never seen this name come in before. Okay. God gets the glory, not a man. I had a spiritual experience about 10 days ago, Heartbeat, that solved a riddle my earthly father and I used to exhaustively discuss. I will have to share with Steve and yourself off air. Amen, guys. Well, those breakthroughs, would you say it's from being interested, right? I think there's revelations that kind of come out of the blue, but a lot of times you're wrestling with these things, and this is that living Jesus who speaks. That's this stuff, right?
Yes. Yes. Now think about that, that very concept for a minute. Jesus is alive and he speaks. Well, there's a group of folks who don't even think Jesus exists, let alone speaks or is alive, so they are not interested.
Right.
But then there's this whole group of people, about 2.5 billion of them, who have built an entire religion on the person of Jesus, and it's crypto. Okay.
There we go. I love the handle, though. I love the handle, man.
Yeah, there you go. And it's news to them that Jesus is alive and he speaks.
Yeah. Well, you got my interest now. You're like, what?
Yeah, what is that all about? Well, gee whiz, what is the use of building a religion around a dude that isn't even hanging around? That had no, why do that? And if you say, well, he is alive and he speaks, then how do you know? Is that theoretical to you or is that practical?
Yeah.
Is that a real deal to you or is that just some premise that you would build a belief system around? Well, part of my life experience is that I finally got to the place and said, hey, listen, I'm not interested in giving my life to a theory. You're either the real deal or you're not.
Yep.
Are you the real deal?
Yeah, just ask him.
It's just that simple.
That's actually, I remember my church experience. And when I look back in retrospect, it's like, you kind of carry along the faith of your parents, let's say, or a lot of people that have kind of grown up at the church. Certainly, I kind of had a really weird kind of mixed experience growing up. But I had that moment where I'm like, you're going to have to show me that you're real because this seems pretty hokey to me. And I need you to be real. I mean, that would be really helpful right now.
Yeah.
But to see that real power is that it wasn't like, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to withhold this showing to you. And I think that's based on this need. And no wonder so many people come to that point of of having that dialogue with the living Jesus when they've basically exhausted every other option that they could control themselves, right? Whether you're in prison, whether you're at the end of yourself, or you're sick, or you're in danger, or whatever it may be, it's like, it seems like we're bent to try to figure it out ourselves. And, for a lot of people, the current explanation of kind of this secular worldview of science and accidental, it kind of fits and it works because things are kind of going along, and you live in kind of a Western society where you can kind of, be on your phone and consume until you get into this situation where, a child of yours dies,
Yeah.
right? Or something really serious happens. You're like, hang on a second. But that's the essence of interest, right? I mean, you have a need to, like, hey, I need a friend here. It's an interesting dynamic. Casey Hex, by the way, I think this is cool. So Tulsa metro area,
Hmm.
and I'm like, here's you in Oklahoma and me from Michigan. So you're in the right spot, man. You got we got Oklahoma and Michigan covered.
Right.
So anyway, I digress. So let me kind of try to bring this back around to say, I think so many people are chasing after things that they think will bring them peace. And especially in our community, that this idea that if I was financially secure, Steve, if I had like, and you could ask a person a number, and I'll just make one up. Let's say if I had $5 million cash in the bank and I could get 5% of my interest, I could get $250,000 a year. And that's when everything could be okay. And I think that's probably one of the number one illusions or lies that money will provide. And I think there's some direct reflection to, like, yeah, I mean, I understand that, there's a lot of things that come from not having resources, but there's a lot of people out there who are chasing all kinds of things in hopes that gaining that will provide them with peace. And what I hear you saying is, no, it's actually a function of your authority over your circumstances. You already have that power to have peace in any and every situation. Is that accurate?
Oh, the first time I ever saw this, I'm driving. I lived on the West Coast in California. Was driving to spring training in Florida, which is in the East Coast. Used to take several different routes, and one particular route took me through Mississippi, Alabama, that way. So I came through Louisiana, then went through, that route, the kind of the southern route to get there. And I wasn't in a hurry that particular year. In those days, there were all kinds of houses, excuse me, that were literally built on stilts. And closer to the water, the higher the taller the stilts, and lower the more inland they'd reduce some. And I would see families sitting on their front porch, and there would be 10 little kids.
Yeah.
Playing just on, and I take these little state highways, and go through these little towns, and they were the happiest daggone people I ever saw.
Yep.
And I said, how in the world can you be so happy and you're living in what looks to me like a shack?
Mm-hmm.
Raggedy clothes, and you're just having the time of your life. Well, that was the question that was in my mind as I'm driving, trying not to get a ticket as I'm driving through town. Years later, Jesus brought that back to me, those kinds of experiences, and said, Steve, you've asked the question. You want to know what the answer is. Are you interested in knowing the answer? Of course, Jesus was saying, they have discovered true wealth. There is a true wealth that God has put into the creation, that as you move closer to it, you recognize it for what it is. It's so important that Jesus even spoke a parable about it. Who will give you, that which disintegrates with its use? If you're not faithful with that, then how in the world are you going to who's going to give you true riches? And I remember when I first looked at that, it was like, oh, wow, there's that true riches. Is that what you're talking about?
Hmm.
Something that doesn't perish with its use. And then you start connecting some of the dots from there. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my word will never pass away. The peace I give to you, peace I give to you, that's not of the world. Well, okay, Jesus, what peace is that?
Yeah.
Wow. It's in that treasure of true riches. It's there. You interested in exploring how to get there?
Yeah.
Well, you see there, so there's an entirely different world, is the point, that is available to us, that's part of this creation that God has made available to us. It's there. Are you interested in going there? And Jesus says, you can't get there without me.
Yeah.
Now, this is not a salvation message like it's taught in the church. This is a very real, dynamic relationship that's where he says, follow me.
But what's so cool about this is there's so much evidence around if you look for it.
Yeah.
Yes. And it's like, this is so cool. A peace, what is a peace that transcends all understanding? And I just love that word, transcends.
Yeah.
What is a peace that transcends all understanding? Not partial understanding, but all understanding. That means I don't know how to comprehend that peace. And what's interesting is I love art. I came up through kind of a theater background, and I got exposed to things. I felt relatively cultured, even though we weren't like, Manhattan rich people. But what I've been just so interested in is, and we've talked about it many times. I remember the first time my first daughter laughed. Okay. So my baby, we brought this baby home, and I don't know what age she was, how many months old she was. But I remember where I was. I was actually at a meeting. I'd taken my wife and my daughter to OU. We went to, and we stayed there. I had meetings there, and they put us up in their facilities on campus, and we stayed in this nice place there on campus, and we brought Emmy with us. And I remember like yesterday, and she was laying on her back on the bed, and I think I tickled her, and she laughed for the first time. And Steve, it was the most amazing, most glorious sound I've ever heard in my entire life.
There's nothing like it. Yeah.
It was like, and it was this first time I heard it, and it's like, there's something there, right? Well, there's that. There's this, these snapshots, these pictures of perfection, right? I imagine my wife rocking a baby, right? I know those pictures. I think about you and me hanging out by the fire having a bourbon, right? Like everything's kind of right in the world right now. I imagine, the ballerina who does the thing that you just go and you see something, or the orchestra swelling or that silence, right? Or that, whatever it is, the beauty of that mountain, or whatever it is for you, that you see something, or you understand something, or you're captivated by something that takes your breath away.
Yeah.
And I don't mean just like physical activity thing, but we see it in so many different ways. The union in marriage when it's right? Because it's often so not right.
Yeah.
And it's like this, and of course, what drives the whole human experience, but also love, right? And you think about, I've got 2 daughters who have boyfriends. And, my daughters wanted to have nothing to do with boys, and now they're wanting to hang out with them all the time. And I'm like, what drives that whole thing is that there's these moments of new experiences where you see a picture of perfection.
Yes.
And a lot of times it's new experiences, and you're like, but it takes your breath away. And it's like, you're talking about, and I'm trying to articulate the beauty of creation in so many different ways. Like, I'll get out on a cold morning with my coffee, and this big buck will walk by and surprise me. I'm like, oh my gosh. Like, and you see that moment, and you're just like, I'm not thinking about the bills. I'm like, dang, that's beautiful, So, I guess the core question is, we can recognize when it happens and we can see it in creation and we know that it's there and it's got this kind of character to it that transcends all understanding. I'm not able to like technically manufacture it because it seems like it's something that's almost like it's a gift across the veil. And I just use that as an analogy to say it's like Jesus hands it to me and it opens up and I go, and I take that breath. But then I recognize, well, yeah, still got the bills, and I still got these things. I don't think what we're advocating is that we just live in la la land, but that it seems like a constant reminder of how the work is not finished, I suppose, like that there is still work to do and that we have a responsibility in, creating that. Because I've told you this many times. I look at you and I go, you know what? I want to be more like Steve. You have the character of someone. I'm like, I want somebody to describe me like I describe you. Well, I'm gonna have to get a couple things in check before I get there,
You
And
need to raise the bar, dude.
yeah, I like, come on, man. But it's like that value, and it's so are there any tips and tricks to this whole idea of going, yeah, it's elusive, it transcends all understanding. We know that it exists, it's evidence that he's with us. These are gifts that come to us. It's this takes your breath away. But I want more of that in my life. But is it by recognizing what it's not? Like, hey, money's not going to do it, man. Like the kids are dirty and happy. Like, how should we see it?
Well, each person is going to have their own, their own experience, and that gets them to the answer of that question, for themselves. But what it begins with is, we've talked this over and over again, cannot overstate it, the importance of interest. Now, having said that, then let's go back to some of the basic fundamentals we've talked about. There is not a single intelligent person on this stream or who will ever see any of these streams that can look out over the horizon of what's happening on the planet and not say, what in the world is going on? Really?
Something ain't right.
Really?
Yeah.
Why are we making this way more complicated than it is? See, who came up with the brainchild of having 1,000 different gender identity markers? Are we not confused enough as it is?
Yeah.
And what does that actually do? What is the strategic intention of redefining or taking away identity? Well, gee whiz, it used to be the time when that would be one of the early markers of mental illness. And now you're telling me we're going to do it on purpose? By outward overt design and call it something that's healthy and good? Okay, now I'm not making, my intention there is not to be making any kind of a political thing, but just to step back and give an example of, wait a minute, that's pretty basic.
Well, it's who we are. It's the definition of who we are. And you're like, we already are confused about who we are.
And if we're too darn confused, we end up in a mental hospital taking Prozac.
And you're out of it, and you're out of the game.
See, you're neutralized.
Neutralized. That's a good way of putting it.
Okay. So let's take a step back and say, wait a minute, there are two things, and these are both related, by the way, that we have no say in when we enter this world, this planet. One is our gender. We have no say in that. The second is our name.
Yeah.
We have no say in our name. Our entire existence exists outside of ourselves. Our coming into existence, the gender that we hold, and the name that we possess. None of that is by our doing. Now, if that is the case, then where does that all come from if we don't initiate that? It begins the journey of asking questions beyond just the Charlie Brown, what do I mean and why am I here? No, it's intended to dictate the next step and saying, wow, if I had nothing to say about that, who did? Who had something to say about that? Who initiated that entire endeavor? Because I certainly didn't. Okay, mom and dad did. Yeah, but mom and dad were in the same boat as I was in. They didn't endeavor that. And if you listen to most marriages, very few marriages occur out of people who have known each other for a long period of time. They've come from totally different places. When they met and married. So the point of all of this is that there is something much bigger than us in play. And I'm interested in knowing what's in play. What is the bigger that I should probably become aware of so that I can then begin to understand what is in play and, more importantly, why it's in play? Why are you screwing around with our gender identity? Why are you scraping off all the wealth? Why are you doing all of this? Boom, boom, boom. Did the Creator design it this way? Creator, did you do that? Was that your intention? Oh, this good and evil thing, what's that all about? I don't need to reduce that to a religious, conversation. All I do is sit in my chair and watch. They're not religious about that. That's just life dynamic being played out. Why is that there? There is an inquisitiveness that I would offer that is the first step to getting anywhere beyond where you are. If you don't have an inquisitive nature about you, most folks just sit there and kind of, we used to use the word veg.
Yeah.
Now, why am I sharing this in this way? Because when you start asking those very legitimate questions and very probing questions, and you say, okay, I'm interested in knowing the guy who built all of this. I'm no longer buying that this just came out of nothing. I'm interested in that. What do you say about why this thing works the way it works, and how did you design it to work? Now, the next day, you're not going to have the answer to all those questions. But trust me, if you really mean that, fasten your seatbelts, because you're about to go on a ride that will literally blow your head right off your shoulders. Okay? Because that's what is going on. The Creator wants you to know why He created this thing. You have all the time, you talk about when Lambo.
Yeah.
Well, the designer and creator of Lamborghini is really interested in you being interested in his product.
Yeah.
He built it for a reason.
That's a good point. That's a really interesting point, taking something that's very practical like an automobile.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And here, I'll throw a few things in there that'll catch your eye and get your attention and get you motivated to find out what makes this thing tick.
Maybe this is right for you.
Yeah.
Wow.
There you go. So start there.
Yeah.
And then watch and see what happens. And one of the things you'll discover is kind of coming full circle back, is you have a whole lot more capability and power than what you really know. And there is not a circumstance in creation that exists that you cannot participate in the peace of God in the midst of that circumstance. Why can you do that? Because you're an Elohim man. And you were built with that capability. just like the Lambo was built with the capability of going 180 miles an hour. The VW Bug wasn't. Okay? But the Lambo, buckle up.
Yep. Well, that term Elohim man is foreign to a lot of people.
Yeah.
And, if you haven't been tracking with this, it's interesting. And I think it's good for just a review. We've shared, I think in early, kind of in the first couple episodes, we talked about the 3 different classes that we see, and when you talk of Elohim man, what you're talking about is this class of beings, right?
Yes.
So one being Elohim man, and this group of, what are the characteristics of Elohim man, but one who is created in God's image and has been given the ability to rule and reign over his creation, right? So he has his authority. And I think one of the examples you used was the naming rights he gave Adam over the animals, right?
Yes.
And basically that authority, right? And then you said, all right, there's a second, which is the angelic realm, right? And one of the things that I learned from you in all of this was, we often talk as Elohim man as ministers, when in reality, the ministry responsibility has been assigned to the angelic class. And this is not, the angelic class is in the spiritual realm, and we are here in the physical realm and the spiritual realm. They're limited, but they are messengers. And then there is the animal class, and the animal class is the servant class. And this is the class where, I eat hamburgers, right? So it's interesting how, if that order of thing, God, his man, his, and to think that there's this, these messengers, or these, there's a hierarchy, and there is assignment, and there is, it's amazing to think that here we are, we talk about being on the edge of disclosure. I heard it was like a short video, but it was Lou Elizondo. That's the guy who worked for ATIP. And he's real sober in the way he communicates this, because he left the government, right? He was the first whistleblower in 2017. And he's very sober when he talks about this. And it's almost depressing to him. But this is what he said, and I saw this last night. He said, because he signed things that basically said, I can't tell you what I know. I've only been approved to tell you these things. So whenever anyone asks him, hey, what are they? What is this? He can tell certain things like, hey, I went to General Mattis. I said, hey, we got a national security issue here. We need to figure out what these are. And General Mattis said, we already know what they are. Lou, stop investigating. And he's like, well, what do you mean? Like, is it China's or Russia's? He's like, no. He's like, oh, is it ours? No. He's like, well, what is it? And General Mattis says to him, have you read your Bible recently? And he's like, well, I think I know what's there. He goes, Lou, they're demons. Drop it. Okay, so this is from the Pentagon, right? So I've followed him since that day, since he's obviously said that. And I see this video of him, and he says, I can't tell you the detail, but he said, you can tell he's super concerned. He goes, the stuff that you've learned in maybe Sunday school, or, you learned it, at the dinner table or at bedtime, and the stories your parents told you, and the stories that you've heard of who we are, is not true. And of course, the theme of what we talk about here is this idea of what has been the theme of this whole thing. You've forgotten who you are. Well, why would anyone want you to forget who you are, Steve?
Yep. No, you are.
Because if you knew who you are, and you make a really good point, like, hey, the dog crapped here, like, this is not valuable. You don't rule over inanimate objects.
Yeah.
You rule over things that have power that you could extract or take or control or neutralize.
Yes.
And it's really interesting that we've got movies like The Matrix, where it's like, hey, Neo, you're the one. Do you realize who you are? Oh, this is who I am? But what's, I think, also interesting is I think we present it as like, you're Superman, Steve. Like, now flex your muscles and fly.
Yeah.
When in reality, here we are about, we're almost on the eve of the birth of the celebration of Jesus's birth. Why in the world would God send his son into the world, right? Why would he I almost feel like it's dad turned the car around. He's like, you kids keep on acting up. I'm going to come back there and knock your heads together. And it's like, hold on, after all this stuff, you decided to come here and tell us what's going on. Like, you obviously didn't get it. I created all this stuff and I'm going to come and I'm going to actually tell you directly. But I think that, so I would love for your commentary around this. I don't believe that the power we have is one that is meant to be wielded against each other. It's not meant to be used to extract and control and lord over, but that its character is, what we talked about, this blessing and protecting, this nature and character of God. It's something, it's not power, it's authority. Can you help shed some light on what is that thing that we are remembering here?
Yeah. Yeah. There is this verse in Proverbs that says, as a person thinks, so is he. As a person thinks, so is he. So think about that for a minute. If you were wanting to control me, what would you first attack or first go after?
Hearts and minds, baby.
Yep, the way that guy thinks.
Yeah.
If I can fashion the way he thinks, I can control him.
Interesting.
Now we see that everywhere.
Yeah, but this is the essence of propaganda.
Yes, it's propaganda. It's the nature of education, indoctrination. I mean, we can call it all kinds of stuff, but the simplicity of it is, if you can fashion the way a person thinks, then you create in that person a way of behaving and acting, and which is an outgrowth of what they think about themselves primarily. Wow. And so you're fashioning and you're refashioning. Now, inside the Christian church, if I were to talk about, the Elohim man, the angelic class, and I talk about the ruling class and the ministering class and the serving class in the way you described just a little bit ago so well. That is totally foreign language inside that environment that would then attribute that to being new agey.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, the moment you put new age on that, guess what virtually everybody inside that environment does?
Rejects it. Yep.
Okay, so how did that come to be? How does that work? Now, you mentioned naming rights a little bit ago. Do you know that the Supreme Court ruling about Trump is an exercise in naming rights?
Oh, the one that's coming up?
The judgment at the Colorado Supreme Court.
The Colorado Supreme Court, yeah, because it's going to go to the federal Supreme Court next.
Yes.
Yeah.
That is an exercise of naming rights.
Yeah.
Now, how many people do you know would identify that as naming rights?
No one.
Because we're not taught.
Yeah.
Why aren't we taught this?
Yeah.
See, we are told over and over again inside the book that many people on this channel and in this stream talk about, the Bible, it says, hey, my people perish for lack of knowledge. Well, Jesus, what information am I missing?
Yep.
We have Paul, the Apostle Paul, talking about the renewing of our mind, the transforming of our mind. Why? Why would why would he be talking about that being such an important thing inside the life of an individual who is committed to following Jesus? Why is the renewing, the transforming, the reconfiguration of the mind so important?
Well, and he said what? To test and approve what God's will is.
Right? How does a mind that doesn't even understand how the slightest comprehension of how God created things, how in the world can that person prove anything related to the matters of God? So one of the early things he does is he starts to strip away all of the nonsense and starts to rebuild our minds into thinking the way that he thinks, the way he sees things. All right. So how about the way that we just function in life on an everyday basis is a direct function and exercise of naming rights. You want to take a look at a few of them?
Yep.
Okay. You mentioned it. You mentioned this, I think, on one of your streams the other day, that we are consumers. Tell me what a consumer does. Is a consumer independent or dependent?
Well, dependent.
Okay, totally dependent. And what does a consumer do?
I mean, at the end of the day, I hate to use the definition to consume, but I mean, they're taking, if you will, I suppose.
They're taking. They are the ones who are absorbing resource, extracting resource for themselves.
Yep.
Okay. So it is an outward in dynamic.
Mm-hmm.
And the consumer is the one who now needs to be taken care of. He is a dependent being. And who is going to remedy that need for consumption? Producers. Who do we see as the producers?
Who do we?
Yeah, who do we normally see as the producers, the ones who are satisfying our need to consume?
I mean, it's corporate, it's government, it's
Right? See? And so what are they doing? They are then called, we refer to them as the suppliers or the producers.
Mm-hmm.
Well, okay. What does God call us?
Creators.
That's right. We're the creators. We're the wealth producers. We are literally the wealth producers who have been renamed consumers.
Wow. That's enormous. Enormous.
Now, once you pause and think about that, you go, wait a minute. How did I become somebody who is a dependent when I'm actually the one who produces the wealth that supplies everyone and everything else with the necessities of life?
Yeah.
How does that work? Okay, now let's talk about the wealthy. Okay, who's wealthy? Okay, when we look at somebody and say that person's wealthy, what do we have in mind when we think about that?
Rich people.
Rich people. Oh, rich people. Who are the rest of us?
Poor people.
Rich and poor. Who is the one that produced the wealth?
The poor people.
The poor people, the wealth producers. Who are the ones that got the wealth?
The rich people.
How did they get that?
By extracting.
They consumed the wealth.
Yeah.
They are actually the consumers.
And it's backwards.
It's
upside down. It's upside down.
Like upside down.
Yeah.
And we could go through all of this. Now, I'm not trying to demonize corporations or people of means and wealth and stuff like that. I'm talking about that they're like, now we go back to our left side, right side of the slide kind of thing. God built the creation to function in a particular kind of way, and its design is to produce wealth beyond the resource it takes, to produce it. You are constantly giving the illustration of the 1 to 1600 return with the corn.
Yep.
Okay? That's the way it's designed to work. And yet somehow, through the exercise of naming rights, we have accepted that we are the ones who are the consumers. We are the ones who are dependent. We are the ones who are needy. And it's the wealthy, it's the corporate interests that are the producers. No, they're not. We are the producers.
Okay. This is way too good for us to just let it come and go. Okay, so let's talk about this. We talk about how money is a proxy for human labor and that there's no value outside of human labor. Well, what defines human labor but our creative ability? And I often joke that my dog doesn't cook me dinner and doesn't make furniture, right? And talk about a consumer. My dog's a consumer. But if you think about this, the creative ability that we have that is unique to us. And I'm not, saying that the elephant doesn't paint a painting, they'll put the paint on the. What I'm saying is, you mentioned a story about you sitting. I think you were sitting in a coffee shop or somewhere, and you looked around, and everything you looked at, you realized was actually created by people, right? So God's man. And if you think about that, what you're saying is, and this, boy, we could go into the whole term Christian, and it would tie into this as well.
Yes.
Is this idea that someone is naming you something, and they're telling you who you are, right? They're saying you are a consumer. Now, I think you could probably split that hair, and you could say, well, my son, if I let him be on the Xbox and on his phone all the time, he will do it. Like, I have to stop him from doing it. He would love to just scroll, right? And a lot of people are like that. And I think we could split the hair and say, you know what? I'm not being particularly productive when I'm just scrolling. But when you get to this base layer of who are the creators and where is the value created, and we see this, I think, at the Industrial Revolution significantly with with unions and such, is that people realized that people were dying. There was unsafe situations, and people were literally being, the labor itself was being destroyed. And it was extremely painful for the sake of the Rockefellers with Standard Oil or whatever it may be, or Carnegie or whatever. But I think you're making a really big point, and this is really relative to the crypto folks here as well, is that if you can understand that the wealth producers are you, and if you think about that from like a spiritual perspective, well, that's what defines you, is your ability to create value. And you have authority over these things. You have the ability to do the craft or to do the thing and create it. And Richard Hart often says, he's like, hey, if you want a picture of a pony, you can draw one. And I love that story because it's so funny, but it's true. If you want a picture of a pony, you can draw one. It might not be particularly good, but you have one now and you didn't have one before. And that's really at the heart of what you're saying, is that value, the creators, the producers are us. And we're the ones that are that wealth. And of course, what has happened now in our society, but the governments, those that are the consumers, feel very comfortable reaching into our pocket and sending that value, extracting it from us and sending it to the Ukraine and laundering it back to the military industrial complex. So if you don't demonize the rich folks, I will.
Well, and what I'd like to interject here just a second is, if we're not careful here, we will actually start identifying good guys, bad guys.
Yeah.
And what I'm, for my part anyway, what I'm trying to inspire us, if I will, a little bit, is to start asking the questions why. If everybody on the planet decided they were going to quit working, okay, let's just take for a second, all wealth is a product of human labor. All wealth. You terminate human labor, you have no wealth. Well, if that is the case, then why do we keep accepting the name consumer? Okay, good question. Let's pause there for a second. That's on the work side. Okay, I'm starting to get an idea how this works. Now let's look at it at what we call the political side. Okay, what did we do? We accepted the term taxpayer. You ever listen to the government when it's talking about the taxpayer.
Mm-hmm.
And we say, okay, yeah, we're a taxpayer. How did they characterize the taxpayer? See, they characterize the taxpayer as somebody who is the ultimate citizen, who is looking out for the best interests of the country. And the better taxpayer you are, the better citizen you are, and it's a high and noble position to be a taxpayer. But what did Jesus say the taxpayer was? One who is under obligation and not free.
A slave.
Yep. So when the government decides, when the president of the United States stands up and says, we're not going to allow the debt, to default on the payment of our debt because we have pledged that the good faith and credit of the United States. What is the collateral for that good faith and credit?
I mean, it's our production.
It's the wealth producers.
Yeah.
Who have accepted the name taxpayer.
Yep.
And the taxpayer is a slave, and the slave has no rights to anything. Wow. How do we get there? How did this thing work? Okay, now we have one more thing. Now we have an enforcement issue of leadership.
Yep.
Now let's go back full circle back to Trump and what's happening there. Again, these are not political issues. These are watching who is it that's pulling all these levers in a system that once produced the greatest nation in the world. Who's pulling these levers? So what do? The Supreme Court of Colorado said Trump does not qualify to be on the ballot because they have deemed him an insurrectionist.
Yep.
What have they just called him? Yep, an insurrectionist. They have just renamed him.
Yeah, they have, because he was not convicted of any of that. They literally named him.
They literally named him an insurrectionist.
Out of the blue. Yeah.
Yep. See? And oh, by the way, the Constitution says that an insurrectionist does not qualify, cannot participate. So we will name him that.
Yeah, without due process, without any evidence of that, and no trial. It's amazing to me how.
Now, why are they able to do that within their own state?
Because they named him.
They named him, and the citizens of that state have accepted that they are slaves without any rights of their own, except those rights that are given to them. Now, can I finish up with the rights deal?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, what do? You even had Daniel on here talking about this, about going to the legislature,
Yep.
and he says the citizens of this state, all political power rests in the citizens. And then he looks at that committee and says, the citizens have a right. Upside down. The moment you do that, you have flipped this thing on its head. Okay, so if the citizens have a right, is that why your Constitution was created? Constitution wasn't created to preserve the rights of the creators of that Constitution. It was to limit those who were being delegated both authority and responsibility to exercise certain duties on behalf of the citizenry. So it's not, no, you don't have, the citizens have a right to have a vote. It's, please describe for me the authority you are operating to deny us what we demand. If you're going to point to the Constitution, the Texas Constitution, it's not there. The citizens have delegated to you certain limited responsibilities. That does not fall. What you are doing, your attempt to deny or even thinking about denying, is falling outside your authority.
Yeah.
Now we're into authority. Final statement. And this is how it all works. In absence of authority, there's only power. And power becomes the mechanism of imposition and enforcement in absence of authority. And that's what we're watching happening all around us. We have fallen prey to the authority granted through naming rights, and we are sitting here with absolute feeling like we are impotent to do anything because we've accepted names that have decreed that we're impotent, that we're nothing. We are slaves. And as folks, that's how we got here.
Yep.
No, what are we going to do about that?
Yep.
Are we happy with those set of circumstances? If not, then hey, go find out who you are.
Yeah. There's so many layers to this, Steve, but it's the same thing over and over again. I went down a rabbit hole of independent music the other day. And you remember that guy, Oliver Anthony, who sang that song about the rich men north of Richmond?
Yeah.
Well, there's a group that it's Music West Virginia or something like that. And all these great singer-songwriters that have come out of this, and they come out of deep pain. And it's interesting that you say naming rights, right? How many times have we heard of, and this comes out of a lot of those songs, there's a lot of people that are hooked on meth and fentanyl in that area, right? So kind of Appalachia area. And, here's this young man singing this song about how his mother was hooked on drugs. And, he was just lamenting the fact that basically because of her addiction, what she named him. And I don't mean his actual name. I like who you are, right? And how many times have we had parents say, I'm sure there's 1 in 10, 1 in 5 people who have had somebody say to them, you will never amount to anything.
Yeah.
And think about that for a second, because that's the layers that I see, is that this is on so many different levels, all the way up to, let's say, government is saying, you're the taxpayer, you're the consumer. And we believe this, right? We're like, oh, okay, I guess I'll just go along with this. I don't have any power. My vote doesn't mean anything. I'm not sovereign, right? And so we fall into this. And what we don't realize is that, we're anti-slavery, right? When we see, people who are, indentured, and we say that that's wrong. But what I think you're articulating is, in this broader sense, this is where the spiritual component comes in here, is that it's so clever and it's so crafty. But if you want to manipulate people, and you think about, what we consider to be the kind of the psychotic people and the people that are very, very controlling, and I'm sure many people are aware of somebody in their life like this, they tell you who you are. And I think about in, kind of modern psychology, so many people, why do they go to somebody? And what did psychologists do? I'm not trying to knock the profession, but if anything, you're paying for someone to let you vomit on them, get this stuff out. And so much of that is, well, daddy told me that I would amount to nothing, and I believed him. And you kind of think about that. Well, what is this whole idea? Why are there forces, that are human and otherwise, that are trying to redefine who we are? Because if we were, to your point, to understand and to remember, who we are, we'll realize it's not powerful, it's authority, right? And that authority has power with it, right? It comes with, And I think that in that essence, it's actually where the peace that transcends all understanding exists, is in the confidence of knowing. And that's why, it's interesting. The church seems to get like, it's almost like the church is good with the cliff notes, right? What do they say? Well, God loves you, right? At a very high level, I could agree with that, right? But you don't understand the depths of it, right? If you understand the depths of it, you realize, no, no, no. He loves you because you are an extension of him. He created you in his image and he gave you these attributes. And basically, the one who controls the air, right? The one that's the forces of darkness are redefining who you are. And when you wants to get your authority to be able to have the power because it can't function without it. And it's really, I think it's, personally empowering, but it also relates to what's happening in Texas or what's happening in the world here is that, I mean, it says people are much more willing to suffer than change. And, you think about revolutions that are, let's say political in nature. Why do they happen? Right? Things get untenable. I mean, literally, we can't, I mean, people will deal with a lot of crap and a lot of slavery just to get along.
Yeah.
Um, and this is so interesting because the value isn't just a political freedom, it's not a financial freedom. It transcends understanding. And they do go hand in hand, right? But it's layered, right? Because you're like, you could be tortured and have freedom. You could have a peace that transcends all understanding underneath literal physical torture. However, there's all these layers to this, and you realize, I mean, I kind of think about this in my own life. Like, what have I been told who I am? People have defined who you are and told you who you are
And
outside of your name.
they have been the instruments of creating a way of thinking that you will eventually become.
Yeah. Well, and that makes
Train up a child in the way they should go, and when they are old, they will not depart from it. It's a generational strategy. And
yeah,
until we see it strategically, all we'll do is complain about it and point at somebody else as the
yeah.
problem. And it's like, no, folks, we're bigger than that.
Well, this is incredible because the implications are tremendous. We talked about it on another stream, and it's so interesting to me. Look at our kind of modern educational system, and it's changing a little bit because of technology. But I think about when I was a kid. I remember walking into one of my big, classes in college, and every single chair was fixed to the ground and was in rows and in order.
Mm.
And think about, there's a bell system. It's funny, people don't think about the origins of these things. When the Industrial Revolution happened and they needed workers within the workplace, the bell system was a system of moving and changing, and basically that was the order. And what did they want? Structured, ordered, timed bell rings, right? I mean, look at Pavlov's dog, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting that what we've basically said is, what do we want to create? And you're saying, you can program this stuff. And what is the propaganda? Well, I'm going to tell you, sit down and shut up. Kids are to be seen and not heard. And we need workers who are going to respond to the bell. And it's interesting that, we do this all the time. I mean, how do parents manipulate kids?
Yeah.
Right. And I knew a kid who committed suicide. And, if you were outside of that family situation, you could have predicted that years in advance. I mean, there's only so much of that you can handle. And I mean, I saw it when I was at the kid's house. I mean, it's just, how much berating can you take?
Yeah.
And then I think about my own dad and what he dealt with in his life. And what do people kind of resort to? Well, self-medication. And then I look at the men in our society, and right, what does Disney say you are? You're a dopey Disney dad. Dad's not in control. Dad's an idiot. Mom's in control, and dad's an idiot. And it's interesting, this whole non-leadership dopey guy. Remember what was it, Little House on the Prairie? There was a real man there. And now it's like, well, he's the butt of every joke. And it's like, well, we're going to tell you who you are. You are, well, look at toxic masculinity and all this kind of stuff. And it's interesting. You see it everywhere you look. This renaming of people to keep them in that place,
Yeah.
right? And of course, we see that. Well, I mean, look at just the nature of racism throughout history, right? Or I mean, heck, look what happened in 1994 in Rwanda. I mean, if you're a Belgian person, you hopefully know this story. But it's interesting what would happen in very modern times of telling a group of people who they are opposed to another people group right next to them. I mean, family members killed each other's with machetes. 1 million people were that genocide. And it's interesting, but it's the same thing. Well, look at the Nazis, right? Who are the Jews? We're defining who people are, and we're programming you to believe that. And it's interesting that chaos that comes out of that, clearly the spiritual component of this is, hey, you're neutered, you are neutralized if you're fighting amongst yourselves. And that's why I'm so enamored with crypto and just the very nature of the thing changing, right?
Yeah.
Because it's like the fuel of this system it's kind of up for grabs. And what I fear is that, it's like the guy in the Bible that were like, well, he was forgiven his debt and he was so thankful his debt was forgiven. And then he goes and whips the guy's ass who owes him money. And it's like, hold on a second, you were just forgiven this. And now you're going to go bust this guy's chops. And you think about that, you go, hold on, we gotta look at this system. And because I feel like there's a lot of people, the one Lambo crowd, let's say there's an abundance coming, Steve. And this is the thing that seems somewhat futile to me is like, I get it. And I'm like, okay, that makes sense. And wow, I could like rule and reign in the nature and character, and I could bless and protect. And I could be I could have a ring of authority, and, and I could make his name known. Right. But there's a part of me that's like, yeah. And this abundance comes, and those who receive that abundance create new storehouses and create new lording and hoarding, and the cycle continues. And I'm not saying it's futile, but at times you're just like, come on, Jesus. I'm like, and I guess it's you have the faith to recognize that it happens one person at a time, but it seems like a Herculean effort. But I mean, it seems like this is the plan, right? And if you ask him, he'll share this stuff, and it's revelation to me.
If you kind of the way that I break it down for, to try to help folks get it, is there is this word that is used in the New Testament in particular called the world, that is translated the world. Okay, so one of the more famous verses that most of us would be familiar with is, John 3:16. Anybody who's a sports fan has seen John 3:16.
My big old afro that's multicolored.
Yes, that's right. It says, "For God so loved the world." Well, that word "world" is cosmos, and we talked about this in the past. And cosmos is an order and arrangement of things. It's an ornamentation. It is the device, if you will, for how the creation functions. And so the earthly portion, that world device, that God so loved, that device that administers and orders the earth and all that occurs on that. Well, why does he love it? See, we hear that. Here's a redefining again. We hear that as people. For God so loved the world. We hear that as people. Why? Because we're trained that world means people. Well, I think there is a word in Greek for people. So if he meant people, I'm pretty sure that Jesus, who's pretty articulate, would have said people. You said world. Why? Because the world, this mechanism, has been hijacked. And it's hijacked in such a way to exploit and destroy. In another place, it's called kill, steal, and destroy. So the very mechanism that has been used and created to add blessing and protection for us has been hijacked to actually destroy us. And Jesus says, if you believe the Son, if you believe how God created the Son to function, then you'll be saved from that. You'll be delivered out of the danger that poses and taken into safety. Now, what have we done? We've completely redefined all of those terms to where now it turns it into a religious event.
Yeah.
That Jesus is talking about himself. If you believe in the Son, speaking about him. Well, once again, Jesus is pretty articulate. Why didn't he just say me? Okay? He didn't say me for a reason. And if you ask him about it and say, tell me why you use these terms, I'm going to extract all of my previous understanding. Just take the words for what they are. Why did you use world, cosmos, instead of people? Why did you say believe in the Son instead of believing in you? Shall have eternal life. Is that what that word means? That's not what that word means at all. The whole definition of all of those words have been completely redefined to mean something entirely different than what Jesus was describing. Well, I want to know why they were redefined. Why wasn't it good enough to just use the words that Jesus said and describe them in a way that was accurate, an accurate representation of what he was saying? Why didn't you do that?
Will you say John 3:16 the way that the original words say? Will you spell it out?
Yeah, off the top of my head, for God so loved the ordered arrangement of his creation that he gave his Son of a singular class. That whoever believes in him in that singular class, actually the word is the same, and whoever believes in the same, the singular class of Son, this one-of-a-kind Son, shall not enter into total destruction and perish, but enter into the quality of life from the ages to the ages. Okay, now that's off the top of my head. But when you look at that, you hear a completely different message from Jesus. And that message is, hey, listen, the object of attention here, what you're not understanding is that you're being held captive here by the hijacking of a device. And if you come into understanding who the Son is, and you enter into the awareness of who the Son is, then things will begin to change. No longer will you be destroyed, but what will happen is you will enter into a quality of life that'll take you from the ages to the ages.
Okay. So let me. This is big. This is big theologic stuff. This is big, like practical stuff. Okay. So what I hear you saying is, if we were made and created in the image of God, and we are part of the Elohim class,
and we understand that we're part of the Elohim class.
We understand that we're part of the Elohim class, that God so loved the cosmos. He so loved this creation, this mechanism, this world, or this simulation, right? This thing that you find yourself in so much that he sent you, which is an extension of him and himself, right? Because we say Jesus is alive and he speaks, and you would see things from his perspective. The way in which I become a son, not just the physical cells that I'm made up of, but how I come to the understanding of sonship, true sonship, is one that recognizes his authority to speak to me. And that as I come into the understanding that I am an extension of him, I am not him, but I am him, that in that hierarchy of authority, that in this mechanism, because it is actually a part of the mechanism that I would hear him, right? The part of the construction of the cosmos is actually the fact that he's alive and he speaks. And
That the Son works with the Father. Now we're
right.
back to, okay, keep
Yeah.
going.
So it's a wonderful thing, but it's nuanced because it's not saying Steve Staggs is Jesus Christ. Well, actually kind of is, but it's in the context of saying, well, did he not say that you are Elohim man? You are created in my image, right? You have this knowledge of good and evil. You have the ability to make choice like me. You will be like God, right?
Mhm.
But only in the context of his authority. Because when you go your own way, that's you going your own way versus you being in alignment with him. Well, what's the result of your alignment as a son, as one who listens and hears and acts in accordance and with the creator? Essentially, things will go well with you. And that this thing that is the result of coming in alignment, correct alignment, right side up, if you will, to this creation that he loves is a benefit, a piece of that transcends all understanding, which ultimately is life, ages to ages, what we would call eternal. Fair?
See, exactly. Now let's pause, for those, and so that we kind of refine some of this, because there's a lot we're wading into some lines of defenses, that cause us to be completely misunderstood. But let's just let the scriptures speak to this very thing. Okay, so for God so loved the cosmos, the mechanism he created to order and arrange and administer his creation, that he sent his son. Okay, and the translation says only begotten, but what I want to emphasize here is his son. Well, what does this only begotten word mean? It means one of a singular class. So while I'm describing this, you can go into the little Bible Hub thing and look up the words to see if I'm giving an accurate representation. One of a single class of sons. So it's his son of a particular class, and there's only one of them, one class. That one, let's now look at that son. What that son will do, the effect of that son will be that you're going to not have to worry about all this destruction thing that's going on. So let's pause right there. Now let's go back to the creation. Okay, when God created man, what did he have man do? What was his assignment?
To rule and reign.
To rule.
Rule.
Okay, he was a son who was to rule. Who was he to rule with?
I mean, the father, I assume.
Yeah. He was to rule. And that's the whole story of the Cain and Abel,
Yep.
right? Cain did his own thing and Abel did his thing. One was acceptable, one wasn't. He always said, go back, Cain, and try again. It's opening the door to all kinds of stuff here you're not going to really appreciate. All right, so what we have is now the Son who is given authority to administer the order and arrangement that God had created in the earth, and he was to do it in a way with the Creator. And everything was peachy until what happened? Okay, the serpent comes in. We talked about that a bit. And the serpent makes a promise. If you do this, you will be like God. Now let's go back and let's look at those words again. You will become like the Elohim. Well, she was already an Elohim. Once she did what he asked her to do, she became like the Elohim.
Ooh.
She was no longer the Elohim, she became like the Elohim. And now, not only was she like the Elohim, which is having authority, having power, having all of these various things, but now she was now subject as an Elohim, not as a ruler as an Elohim.
Okay, this brings up a big question then. Did the eating of the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil actually provide the knowledge of good and evil?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm just going to split this hair with you.
Yeah.
If you're already the Elohim prior to this, right? And that's prior to eating of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. I think we're presented in the church often that that's the act of your eyes being opened. And I guess whether or not you're aware of it, you are who you are. You are the Elohim that you were created to be. But there seems to be some function that changed of awareness. You know, this idea of that eyes were open from eating of this thing. So do we disregard the eyes being opened to assume that they've always been opened? Or did they actually be opened by eating of this? Because there's two things going on. One is the transactional of authority, right? You're going to be like him because you're saying you were already that prior. You've now taken the likeness of this, but your eyes did get open. So the question I've got is, what are the differences between those two things?
Okay. One is knowledge rooted in information. The other is knowledge rooted in experience.
Okay.
See, and any one of us know the difference. You know, how many times have we said, well, I thought it was this way until I did this?
Yeah.
Eve was aware in terms of Eve was deceived. Okay, so that takes us into another layer here, if you want to go down that track. But there is an element of deception that comes into this, that the end of the story was not with Eve. The eating with Eve was not when Eve ate, that is not what triggered us into the current dimension. It was when Adam accepted that. And the two now, the two shall be joined and become one flesh? By the testimony of two or three, every fact is confirmed. He was the senior member, if you will, of the Elohim class in that particular, and he's the one who sealed that transaction. It's much like, Laura may want to do something, but she can't commit the family without both of your signatures, for an example, by way of example.
Yep.
So if she goes out and signs something, you say, man, we're not going to do that. So you have the ability to veto that, and vice versa, by the way.
Yep.
If there's a family decision that has to be made, it requires both signatures, you can sign it and she can come back and say, nope, I'm not doing that. Well, guess what it does? It vetoes the effect of the transaction.
Yep.
So now, what I'm describing here is that What Jesus was telling Nicodemus in John 3:16, he was not giving him a salvation message. He was informing him of how the earth was designed to function. If you go back into the early stages of the exchange between Nicodemus and Jesus, you'll see that Nicodemus was completely flabbergasted about what Jesus was saying, and Jesus was talking to him about the kingdom of God.
Mm-hmm.
Nicodemus was stuck in the religious order. So now let's kind of take this the next step in how this renaming thing kind of works. So when you rename, and we've taken a picture of John 3:16, if you rename and redefine, then everybody who accepts that renaming and redefinition comes under the authority of the one who did the renaming. Just like Eve did with the serpent. She accepted the renaming of being like the Elohim. Now we look at that and say, yeah, you're splitting hairs, you're getting old. No. That's how it works in that world. In the spiritual world, this is how it works.
Well, and you've pointed out this a number of times too, that when Paul goes to Macedonia, what is the slave, girl say to them? Well, basically, this is, what do we say? The spirit of Apollo, right?
Yes.
And of course, it's very clear that this slave girl was possessed.
Yes.
And what did the possessed, which I think we would all agree is not Jesus, it's not God's plan. It is one who is lying. And what is the lie? These are the bondservants of the Most High God who have come to offer salvation. And it's really interesting. It shows you the clever nature of how renaming defines you. We could go into, I don't think we should go into the Christian naming thing, but it is a part of the same thing. And it's interesting that we see this in multiple places, that this is kind of the go-to of the spirit of darkness, is essentially it's a lie, right? I mean, I'm going to lie to you. I'm going to tell you something that's not true, and you're going to believe it. And if you believe it, you give your authority away.
That's the way that it works. And you do it voluntarily.
Yeah. Well, and that's the only way they get power. I think it's really interesting.
The only way.
It's really interesting to me. And then we go back to this idea of like the open ports, right? Just what's my daily activity? It's like, well, it has been so useful to me. And I think this is really important. I've been watching the chat and people getting really worked up. They really do. And folks, the reason
and I understand it.
Yeah. And the reason we're doing this on the stream is I spent how many months with you prior to ever doing this stream getting really worked up about stuff. Okay. Yeah. So I've been through this whole cycle and now we're doing it publicly for you, right? We're having this conversation. These are tough things, folks, because what they do is they challenge deeply rooted stories, right? Narratives that you've heard and you're like, well, no, I've always heard it this way, so it must be true. Well, what did Lou Elizondo say? He's literally saying, we're coming into a time where everything will be exposed. What did Jesus say? I am the way, the truth, and the life. Okay, so wouldn't it be surprising that there's a guy who ran WikiLeaks, and he found in documents that were given to him that the U.S. government was essentially guilty of war crimes, amongst other things, right? Spying on people, basically lying to their people. Oh, we don't, look at domestic information. We don't. And Julian Assange is in jail, right? What are the powers that be want to do? They want to silence those who are exposing things for what they are. And here we are in this era where everything was easy to keep like quiet. And it's interesting to me that the technologies and everything that's happened has created a scenario in which it's very, very difficult to keep things under wraps. Even this whole like UFO stuff. I believe we're coming into an era where everything's going to be exposed. But what is the go-to plan of the spirit of darkness? It's, well, look at this. Why, misinformation, disinformation, all of these things, you know, create fear so that you don't know what to believe. So you don't know what is true. I think what this does though, Steve, is it points you directly to Jesus, right? And you're saying, okay,
And
I don't know what is true. And I want to remind people these things are tough stuff, right? This I went through this process with Steve and I was like, hold on a second, Steve. This is not what I've understood this whole time. And you've even said that's the process you went through.
yep.
Every single time I've ever engaged with Steve about these things, he said, do not trust me, ask him yourself. And I think what is so powerful about that idea is that if you're somebody who believes in Jesus, number one, I want to convince you that he's alive and he speaks, and he's available to share with you his perspective on anything. So do not take Steve's translation of this thing from Greek and go, well, this guy's saying it's this. No, don't believe a man.
No.
Steve is a man. I'm a man. Ask him yourself. And that's been, I think the Bereans, what did the Bereans do? They were like, hey, we've got to check this thing and make sure you're saying the right thing. The same thing's true here, is that this is actually teaching you how to fish, right? This is the whole idea of saying, hey, no, here's the rod and the reel. Knock yourself out. Like you got to go do the casting yourself and you got to go ask him yourself. Because I think what you're doing, which is so great, is saying, hey, here are some questions that no one's asking. Like, why did he create the whole thing? Why are the evil forces give a crap about us? You say that we're just accidental, we're nothing, then why do they care so much? And if they're so damn powerful, why don't they just destroy us? Like, oh, if the aliens and the whatever they are, the spirits and demons and all that, if they're so damn strong, we should be gone. But we're not gone. And there's all kinds of hoopla around getting us to control us and all this stuff. And, we could go into so many rabbit holes about how many people are out there that we know have aligned themselves with this force because it promises power. And what do we see? The wielding of power. And it's really interesting that as this gets exposed more, I think what we're going to see is, think about AGI, right? This is the general intelligence of AI. What's its goal? And this is really interesting because this wraps like all of the things we've talked about for the last couple episodes together. And that is, if you were to ask AI right now, one of these language models, you said, what's the population of Brazil? It would do its best to give you the actual population of Brazil. It's not saying, no, let's give them Argentina's population. No, the point of it is, I need this information and I need it to be true. Do I think it's true? Okay. Now, can you feed crap into one end of this thing and get it to lie? Yeah, that's what people are doing right now, right? Like, well, this one's biased and this one won't talk about Trump and all that stuff. Well, those are humans trying to control the information. Well, that's the media, right? They're going through a filter of their perspective and they want you to believe a certain thing, which is like naming rights, right? I'm going to tell you what to think. What's interesting about this future of AI and all of these things is that we're creating this digital God who's already available. We're creating this other version of this other Tower of Babel, if you will, because we don't believe that the guy who knows it all, who built the whole damn thing, is available. We think we need to build a look-alike. Well, he's not real, so we'll go to this wizard. And I think what's really interesting is it's like this constant cycle of futility. And we've seen it before and we're seeing it again. It's like, come to me, follow me. And it's like, I'm available. And it's amazing to me that we already have super intelligence. We already have access to, but what's interesting is it's not access to the technical data, it's access to the living data, the stuff that actually makes, and what's neat about it is it's restricted in its output because it loves you. It cares for you. Jesus loves you, right? This idea that God actually, because you are an extension of him, and it's crazy how strangely complete it is. But what lengths we would go to bastardize it.
Well, and what I like to do is kind of take us out of the equation here for a minute. And let me share this, because I know what this does to folks.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Oh, you do.
Yeah, I'm very familiar. And the reason is because I went through the same thing as you mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
So I get it. Here's what ends up happening in these kinds of exchanges. We get confronted. Now, I'm speaking very personally here in my own experience. I got confronted with the truth of what I was actually proclaiming. I proclaimed that I believed in Jesus and would do anything he asked me to do.
Mm-hmm.
Well, until somebody confronted my belief system.
Right.
And of course, I believed my belief system was true. The only thing about my belief system is it presented itself to me as being absolute, which was a barrier to me actually going to Jesus and say, "Hey, man, what do you think about this?"
Well, there's no room for that in that model.
Well, there isn't. It because it presents itself as absolute. And so there's no need to go beyond it, because if you go beyond it, you're venturing into the thing that will actually jeopardize your eternal salvation.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay? Now I'm describing what some of the things I went through personally. And finally, I had to get to the place where I said, okay, what am I actually believing? Am I believing a person? Or am I believing a belief system?
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, Lord. Okay, Jesus, what do you say about this?
Okay.
Have I got it right, or am I I don't even know how to describe it. What's going on?
Wow.
And he said, okay.
Yep.
Okay. And little by little, he began to take me and strip away the belief system and replace it with him, the person.
Okay.
And I would venture to say everybody out there who's getting worked up, that's actually what they really want in their life.
Yep. Okay. So I'm gonna try to illustrate this. And I want as much participation. If you're in the chat and you're watching this, whether you've commented before or not, I want you to comment. I want you to comment here. Okay.
Yeah, go for it.
All right. Because I'm going to tell you a little story, and I'm going to ask you if you've ever had this experience before. Okay. So if you've ever experienced this before, put a 1 in the chat. Okay. You've been in a situation where someone was in trouble, maybe not like bleeding out of their aorta, right? But there was some crisis situation or there's some challenging situation. And you felt very compelled to do something somewhat out of the ordinary. And so what I mean by that is you felt compelled or directed or spoken to or instructed to do something that was not in your plan, meaning in your order of business. Okay. So I'm going to tell a story. If you've had any experience similar to this, put a 1 in the chat, +1 in the chat. Okay. So I've had many, many experiences like this, but one I can think of really, I was driving home from church. It was in Dallas, and it was hotter than a $2 shotgun, as the old man would say. And it was probably 108 degrees. There was nobody around. It was so hot. And I'm driving on Northwest Highway, and there is a woman, a mom with a big sign, and it had like a paragraph on it. Like you could not read it from the road. So it clearly wasn't somebody that like thought about marketing. And underneath a little crabapple tree, next to a fence, next to Tom Thumb, were 3 little kids. And these 3 little kids were trying to be sheltered from the sun, and it was hot. And I slowed down, and I just picked up what was on the thing, and she had like this description of the fact that her car transmission went out, and she didn't have the money to fix it to be able to go to work. And I gathered that pretty quickly. And I'm like, this is unusual. This is a mom with her kids underneath this crabapple tree, and it's like there's something right here, right? So what do? Like the idiot I am, I keep driving. I get onto the highway, and the Lord Jesus says to me, not audibly, turn around. And I'm like, no, I want to go home. Like I'm going to go eat lunch. No, turn around. I'm like, what am I going to say to her? That was the discussion I had. Like, what am I going to do? So I'm like, fine. Like, I literally had this kind of like discussion, and I literally got off the exit. I drive back around, and I'm like, I don't know. What am I going to, I'm like, some weird guy coming up to some woman with her kids. Like, I'm like, what, 28 years old? I'm like, all right, fine. I'm literally having this kind of argument with God in my head. I'm like, all right, I go over to Tom Thumb and I park there. And I'm walking up. I'm like, I'm sweating bullets because I'm nervous. I'm like, I don't do this. I don't know why I'm doing this. Well, I do know why I'm doing this because you're making me do this. And so I walk up to this lady and I'm just like, hey, how are you doing? And she's like, oh, I've been out here. And she tells me the story of her transmission, and that it cost, I don't know, $600 to do this. And I'm like, and I'm empathetic of that situation, and her kids are sweating out here. And I'm like, I said, has anyone helped you? And literally behind her is a church, right? I can see a church. I said, has anyone helped you? This is a major road in Dallas. No, but somebody slipped this out the window to me. And it was the bottom half of my church's newsletter, like their bulletin. Somebody had torn off the bottom, which had contact information for my church, I wasn't close to my church. And I'm like, oh, that's really interesting that somebody would get it. And you know what I said? I said, my church will help you. She's like, oh, that's great. I said, well, give me your number. I know the folks there. I'll get you connected. And I was in some kind of leadership at the church at that point. And so I'm like, okay, thank you, Lord. You gave me an assignment, and I'm supposed to go and I'm supposed to help this woman. I didn't have $600 on me. I didn't have the ability to help her with that. But I was like, my church, they tell us every freaking Sunday that this is what they do. They help people in need. They've got a whole thing that does this. They've got a fund. They've got all this stuff, right? Steve, I turned myself inside out to help that woman. The church wanted her to go through counseling, wanted her to hop on one foot, wanted her to do all these things before they would help her. And I apologized to her that I represented that our church would help her, because our church had no interest in helping her. The church that raised $25 million to build a building.
Yeah.
Okay. They were not interested in helping her. They were interested in her believing what they believed. I was so put out by this, Steve. And this is kind of the origin story of this whole, like, okay, this isn't working, right? And so I say that story to say this, and I ask you to put the +1 in the chat in all this. Where's that in the Bible? No, seriously. Show me where in the Bible it says you go to that you're going to pass a woman and she's going to have kids under a crabapple tree. And that when you get onto the highway, that's in 2 Thessalonians, right? Or that's in Philippians, the part where you get off the highway and he talks to you. And then, oh yeah, remember that? That's the other part. That's chapter verse 19, where you walk up on the, it's not there. And I think what I get so worked up about this, because so many times people are saying the Bible, the Bible, the Bible, the Bible, the Bible. Yes, it is showing us the model of this cosmos and this structure. But if Jesus is dead and he does not speak, there's just no point to this thing.
Right.
And everything points to the fact that when you're in need and you're standing out there with your kids under the crabapple tree, that the Lord Jesus himself is going to speak to someone to help you. And I look at that and I just get really frustrated, because it seems so obvious to me, but that we would perpetuate this story, not intentionally, to Jesus is born on Christmas Day. But now when you say John 3:16 and you're like, God so loved this cosmos, he loved this thing that he made that was good, but only in the context of you understanding how it's created. It is a with Jesus thing.
Yeah.
The architect of it all wants you to do it with him. That's the design of this cosmos. But if you're told he's dead and he does not speak, you are neutered. And that's what's happening. And so I would say at the very core of this thing, why I'm so passionate about it, why I do this, why I want Steve on my channel, why I want to do this is because it's not a story of salvation. It's a story of moment by moment partnering with Jesus in this world. And what is the result of that? A peace that transcends all understanding. Like literally drop the mic. That's what it's about. And what's cool about it is don't trust me and don't trust Steve. Ask him yourself.
Yeah.
That's it. And that, Steve, you've shown me the true gospel. That is the true gospel, in my opinion. Jesus is alive and he speaks. Ask him your damn self. That's it. And do what he asks you to do. And I can't tell you how many times those situations have repeated themselves in which he inserts himself into my life and goes, don't worry, man. Don't be afraid. Trust me and I'll show you. Hey, go over here. Hey. And I literally, every time I see somebody in need, you know what I do, Steve? Hey, Jesus, you want me to help them? And sometimes he says no.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm not just some guy looking to like, oh, let me go help people. I'm not. I mean, I'd like to say I was.
Anyway. Well, see, that story is the two sides of John 3:16.
Right.
One side wanted to go help the lady under the direction of Jesus speaking and governing that entire process, and you operated with him.
Right.
As the Father's son. The other was how the institution was managed that was more interested in salvation. The tearing off of the go talk to them, and the requirement to jump through all kinds of hoops before she could have the most basic thing of her need taken care of so she could work and care for her children. There was a greater interest in need in the salvation. And in both instances, that right there is a microcosm of what has happened. Now, we have a choice to look at that and criticize it, or we can look at it and say, wait a minute, how come that's so? How did that happen? I mean, yeah, we can rationalize all kinds of things, from a systematic standpoint, but hey, the basic fundamentals is, hey, here was a lady that was in trouble. One of our own said that Jesus directed him to do these things, and now what we're going to require her to do is to jump through all kinds of hoops. What I would, the question that I learned to ask is not to criticize that position, but to say, how did we get there? How did this church, this group of people, the leadership in this place, how did we get to the place that this is how we operate? How do we get there? One produces destruction, one is designed to produce life. How did we get there? Okay? So it's not a criticism, it's an invitation to inquire how we got there. And once you ask the question, you say, Jesus, how do you see that? It's astounding the things he shows you. Not so much about them, but about you and how you contribute to that. And then the invitation, do you want to learn something different, Steve?
Yeah.
Do you want to learn how to do something different? You were going through that process. Your system was telling you to move on down the road. What was Jesus doing? He was telling you to turn around and help. What did you align yourself with? Your process or his relationship with that young woman that he was inviting you into with him?
Yeah. That's
the difference. Now, I know we're out of time here, but maybe for my part, kind of tie this whole thing together.
Please.
From the beginning. We talked about the Christmas season. Well, what do we do in this season? We take time to celebrate the birth of Jesus for all the various reasons we do. You know why Jesus got killed? You know why his own people killed him? They didn't kill him. They didn't kill him because of the Romans were the hands of the people who actually said We don't condemn you for any good thing that you've done. We condemn you because you as a man make yourself out to be God. And Jesus said, wait a minute. How is it that you want to say that about me? Because I say that I am the Son of God. You're going to kill me because I say I'm the Son of God? Really? Folks, back up, take a look at this. Virtually everyone watching this would be condemned to death in Jesus' day because almost everyone there would consider themselves a son or daughter of God. You would be crucified in Jesus' day. And then Jesus says this amazing thing to them. You search the scriptures because you think in them you will find eternal life. But these are what bear witness of me. These are what speak of me. The entirety of the scriptures that you have submitted yourself to speak of me. And oh, by the way, those very scriptures that you are trying to condemn me by say this. He said, those to whom the word of God comes are God's. You are God's to whom the word of God has come. Now, what do we do with that? I didn't say that. By the way, Jesus didn't even say that. David said that. And when did he say that? He said that in restating what Jehovah himself was saying to David. So if God said that about us, if he called us out, what's going on? Is there an error in the translation, or is there an error in our thinking, or both?
Probably both.
See?
Yeah.
All right. Now, final piece, putting this together. Jesus declared to the folks that his commission was to announce the favorable year of the Lord. And what was he to do? Open the eyes of the blind. I was one. Open the ears of the deaf. I was one. See? To unlock those who are and free them from their captivity, those who are enslaved and incarcerated, to proclaim the favorable year of the Lord. Thank you, Lord Jesus. And when he came, he did not proclaim, seek first the Christian faith. He said, seek first the kingdom of God and how he does things, what is right to him. Seek that first, the kingdom. And all he did was proclaim the kingdom. And somehow today we have come to accept that Christianity and kingdom are the same thing. They're not. Ask him. So thanks, folks, for hanging in there.
Yeah, that's good stuff.
I know this is going to be tough duty sometimes.
Well, and if it's not challenging to our thinking, I mean, why do we do it?
Yeah. Why else do it?
Well, and why would we do the 33rd episode on the 22nd of December? Why would we continue to do this? Well, you jokingly, well, not jokingly, we have this kind of 24 to 72 hour rule. Okay. And I think what's cool about that is whether it's a rule or not, it just is something that we see. I think when I'm interested in engaging with the stuff, it lasts with me. I often will go back and listen to this again on kind of double time, and I'll get new things from it, right? I'll hear you differently, and I'll even hear myself differently. And it's really amazing because I've read portions of the Bible at different times in my life and gotten different things from them. I was sitting with Ray and he told me, hey, you ever think about this related to the prodigal son? And I'm like, oh my gosh, that's wow. And so you realize the dynamics, right? How dynamic this whole thing is. And I just appreciate you, Steve, and your willingness to to kind of trudge through this, but also it bears fruit. It bears fruit. And I think the greatest thing about that is, if there's something that challenges your thinking, do you have a paradigm that's built on a man's translation of something, or do you believe that Jesus is alive and you could ask him yourself? And do you trust that that's who's going to speak to you? And wow, what a different experience of that than going along with the program. So
Yeah.
thank you, Steve, for all that you do. Thanks for your encouragement, and thanks for just being who you are.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you.
Enjoy your Christmas. Merry Christmas to everyone. Give all of our love and care to your family, and I'm sure I'll be talking to you soon.
Great. Thanks, guys. Merry Christmas to everybody.
All right. Once again, you spend another 2 hours, hopefully driving, right? I just imagine you're driving to Oklahoma and you've listened to 2 hours of this. Fantastic. Is that Hex Glen? I think it was the driving. Maybe I got that wrong. Thanks for doing this, guys. Thanks for being a part of it. And thanks for hanging out. I think what's interesting is when I talk about, the price chart or Pulse X or Pulse Chain, or I put Richard Hart in the thumbnail, or price predictions for 2024, I can get a lot of people on a stream. But I was thinking about this, when Jesus pushed back there's so many people, he had to push back in the boat, right? And he tells them an agricultural story. And Steve has articulated, hey, the people are like, hey, that's a good story. I'm going to go home and do my stuff now. And there was a group of people that chased after Jesus because they didn't understand, like, what does this mean? And he said, because you did this, because you chased after me. And he called them the ecclesia, the called out ones. And I think about this what's at the nature of being called out? It's the interest. And it's like, seek and you will find. Don't seek a man. Don't seek Steve. Don't seek me. Jesus is alive and he speaks. Try him on for size. Merry Christmas to you. I hope you have a great time. And I hope you have one of those moments that I long to have with Steve, sitting by the fire, having a bourbon, and just going, you know what? All things are right with the world. I hope you have a moment like that. Take care, everybody. My alarm's ringing. Don't mess with Texas.